The flash of the Nikon in my hand felt like a lightning strike, momentarily blinding the woman who stood on her multi-million-dollar deck in a pair of silk pajamas. "It's over, Brenda," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the fact that I was standing on unpermitted Brazilian hardwood and clutching a thumb drive that contained enough evidence to send the entire Silver Creek board to federal prison. "The prestige ends tonight." Brenda didn't scream. She didn't even move. She just tilted her head in that practiced, porcelain way of hers, the glow from her illegal stone fire pit dancing in her pupils. "You think you're a hero, Benny?" she whispered, her tone a smooth, dangerous silk. "You're an employee. You live in a house I gave you, eating a stipend I approved. If I go down, you don't just lose your job, you lose your front door. Are you really ready to be homeless for the sake of an old man's peeling shutters?" I looked past her toward the darkened cul-de-sac, where 70-year-old Mr. Henderson was likely staring at the forged foreclosure notice she'd forced me to sign. The hard place I'd lived in for 2 years, squeezed between my survival and my conscience, had finally cracked. I wasn't just a resident manager anymore. I was a saboteur with a clipboard, and as the sirens began to wail at the community's main gate, I realized I'd rather sleep in my car than spend one more second as her lapdog. Today's story is from Ben Morgan, a man trapped in the suffocating middle ground of suburban politics as a resident manager for the Silver Creek Homeowners Association. He spends his days measuring mailboxes and enforcing petty rules, not because he loves the power, but because his own housing and livelihood depend on staying in the good graces of a narcissistic board president. He is a man pushed to his breaking point, forced to choose between the safety of a paycheck and the heavy weight of his own conscience. Before we dive in, please do me a favor and smash that like button now and comment below on what you would have done if you were in Ben's situation. Would you have fought against Karen? Or would you have acquiesced to her wishes and gone along with her schemes? The humidity in Silver Creek Estates didn't just hang in the air, it clung to you like a needy relative. It settled right between my collar and my skin. A constant, damp reminder that being the resident manager was a job you could never truly wash off. I stood on the sidewalk of Amberglow Lane, squinting against the relentless Georgia sun. In my left hand, I gripped a professional-grade steel tape measure, the heavy kind that felt like a weapon if you swung it. In my right, a digital camera with a cracked screen and a lens that struggled to focus in the heat. I was currently staring down mailbox number 114, belonging to the Millers. The Millers were good people. Last July, when my AC unit gave up the ghost, Mr. Miller had brought over a portable fan and a six-pack of IPA without me even asking. But the Silver Creek Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CC and RARS, Article 4, Section 3.2, were the closest thing to Holy Scripture in this zip code. All mailboxes shall be mounted at a height of 42 inches from the road surface to the bottom of the box. I knelt in the gutter, the heat radiating off the asphalt through my khakis. I pulled the tape. 41.5 inches. I sighed, the metal tape zipping back into its housing with a sharp, metallic clack that felt far too loud for a Tuesday morning. This was the rock. If I didn't note the half-inch discrepancy, the Architectural Review Committee, a group of 3 retirees with too much time and high-powered binoculars, would flag my weekly report for negligence of duty. If I did note it, I'd have to look Mrs. Miller in the eye at the community pool on Saturday while she asked why I was being a stickler over the height of a post. "Morning, Ben. Working hard or hardly working?" The voice was like a polished silver bell, bright, loud, and impossible to ignore. I didn't even have to look up to know the white Lexus RX was idling at the curb behind me, its engine purring with the quiet confidence of a car that had never seen a dirt road. Brenda, our board president, leaned out of the driver's side window. Her blonde bob was sculpted into a shape that defied both wind and physics. She was wearing a white tennis outfit so crisp it made my eyes ache, and a pair of oversized sunglasses that reflected my own sweaty, disheveled face back at me. Brenda didn't just live in Silver Creek. She acted like she'd personally presided over the big bang that created it. "Just checking the new installations on Amber Glow, Brenda," I said, forced into my professional Ben voice, a tone somewhere between a funeral director and a high school principal. "Good man. Standards are what separate us from the apartment complexes across the highway," she said, flashing a smile that was perfectly white and entirely void of warmth. "We have to keep the prestige up, don't we? If we let one mailbox sag, the next thing you know, people are parking on their lawns and hanging laundry from the balconies." She chuckled at the absurdity of it. though I knew she'd probably call the National Guard if she ever saw a stray sock on a railing. "Oh, and Ben," she continued, her tone shifting into that dangerous, conspiratorial territory. "Did you get my email about the Henderson property? The peeling paint on his shutters is an eyesore. It's dragging down the whole cul-de-sac's valuation. My sister-in-law is thinking of listing her place 2 doors down, and we simply can't have a fixer-upper vibe ruining the curb appeal." I shifted my weight, the gravel crunching under my boots. Mr. Henderson was 82. His wife had passed last winter, and I knew for a fact he hadn't been up a ladder in 5 years. The shutters were the least of his worries. He was mostly worried about the mounting medical bills. "I'm working on a soft-touch approach with him, Brenda. Given the circumstances, I thought I'd offer to help him find a local handyman who won't overcharge." Brenda's expression soured for a microsecond. The mask slipped just enough to show the predator underneath. Then, the clueless smile snapped back on. "Compassion is a lovely hobby, Ben, but management is a job. We aren't a charity. We're a corporation. Send the formal notice of violation by 5. 10 days to cure, then the daily fines start. We can't have exceptions, or the whole system collapses, right?" She didn't wait for an answer. She checked her diamond-encrusted watch, waved a manicured hand, and floored the accelerator. As she sped away, she blew right through the stop sign at the corner of Amber Glow and Willow. The very stop sign she'd spent 3 board meetings lobbying for to protect our children from reckless outsiders. I watched her taillights vanish around the curve. Then, I looked down at my clipboard. Tucked under the Miller's mailbox report was a sticky note I'd written 3 days ago after a late evening walk. "President's Property, Unit 1. Violation. Non-approved lawn ornament. Plastic flamingo. Reported by Anonymous, Unit 42." I looked toward the end of the street where Brenda's estate sat on a double lot. Even from here, I could see it. A garish, neon pink plastic head peeking out from behind her prize-winning, perfectly manicured hydrangeas. It was a clear violation of Article 6, landscaping standards, which forbade whimsical or non-natural statuary. "No exceptions," I whispered to the empty, shimmering street. I looked at the camera in my hand. I could walk down there right now. I could take the photo. I could upload it to the portal before lunch. But I also knew who approved my Christmas bonus. The hard place wasn't just a metaphor anymore. It felt like the walls of the entire neighborhood were slowly closing in. By Wednesday, the humidity had finally broken, replaced by a dry, searing heat that made the Silver Creek pavement shimmer like a shallow lake. I was sitting in the office, which was really just a repurposed storage closet in the back of the community clubhouse, staring at a blinking cursor on my monitor. The air conditioner in here was a window unit that rattled like a tractor, and it was currently losing the war against the afternoon sun. The notice of violation for Mr. Henderson was drafted. All I had to do was click print. I could already see the scene in my head. I could picture him walking down his driveway in those Velcro sneakers he always wore, checking his mail with that hopeful look he got whenever he thought a letter from his grandkids might be tucked in the circulars. I could see his thin, liver-spotted hands trembling as he opened the crisp white envelope with the Silver Creek logo, the logo he'd helped design 20 years ago. He'd see the grainy, zoomed-in photo of his shutters and the bolded text. "Fine schedule, $50 per day until rectified." To a man living on a fixed pension, $50 a day wasn't a corrective measure. It was an eviction notice in slow motion. My mouse hovered over the button. My finger felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Clack, clack, clack. The rhythmic sound of high heels on the linoleum floor announced Brenda before she even cleared the doorway. She didn't knock. Brenda viewed doors as suggestions rather than barriers, and privacy as something only people with secrets needed. She sailed in, carrying a venti iced latte that was sweating more than I was, and a floral folder overflowing with inspiration for the upcoming fall festival. "Benny, tell me you've sent the Henderson notice," she chirped, leaning over my shoulder. The scent of expensive Chanel perfume collided with the stale smell of my lukewarm coffee, creating a sensory cocktail that made my head throb. "I'm just reviewing the wording, Brenda. I'm trying to be precise. You know how the bylaws require specific citations for paint grade violations. Preciseness is your best quality," she said, tapping the screen with a manicured nail that sounded like a woodpecker. "It's why we hired a resident. You have skin in the game." "Oh, and while I'm here, Unit 42. Mrs. Gable." She's been blowing up my phone all morning complaining about a pink bird in the neighborhood. Honestly, that woman is a terror. She calls me every time a leaf blows onto her driveway from a common area oak. Can you go settle her down? Tell her we're looking into it, or whatever you tell the crazies. I felt a cold drop of sweat slide down my spine. My heart did a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Actually, Brenda, I saw the bird. It's a flamingo, a plastic one, in your hydrangeas. I think that's what Mrs. Gable is reporting. Brenda didn't blink. She didn't even stiffen. She just took a long, graceful sip of her latte, the straw making a faint whistling sound. Oh, that? That's not a lawn ornament, Ben. It's a statement piece. It's vintage. My daughter brought it back from a boutique in Palm Springs. It's mid-century modern art. The CC&Rs don't really have a Palm Springs boutique exemption, Brenda, I said, my voice sounding thinner and more defensive than I liked. Article 6, Section 4.1 says no non-natural statuary or plastic ornamentation. If I find the Millers for a half-inch mailbox discrepancy and I hit Henderson for peeling paint, I can't exactly look the other way on a neon pink plastic bird. People talk. They see me walking the dog. They'll ask why you're the exception. Brenda set her latte down on my desk with a deliberate, echoing thud. The clueless narcissist mask didn't slip this time. It hardened into something porcelain and cold. Ben, let's be very clear about how this ecosystem works, she said, her voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous silk. She leaned in so close, I could see the tiny flecks of gold in her eyeshadow. I spend 40 hours a week, unpaid, keeping this neighborhood from turning into a trailer park. I handle the lawyers, the contractors, and the disgruntled idiots like Mrs. Gable, so you can have a quiet little job and a subsidized roof over your head. You live here because I convinced the board we needed a full-time presence. She stood up straight, smoothing her tennis skirt. That flamingo stays. It's a symbol of the eclectic elegance I'm trying to cultivate here to break up the monotony. If you can't distinguish between a piece of curated art and a dying man's rotting shutters, then I start to wonder if we need a manager with a bit more vision. Or perhaps just a manager who understands who signs his performance reviews. She picked up her drink, flashed a smile that felt like a paper cut, and walked out without waiting for a reply. I sat there in the silence of the closet, the rattling hum of the AC unit the only sound left. My hand was shaking as I reached for the mouse. I didn't click print on Henderson's file. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened the resident directory and scrolled down to Unit 1. Brenda's property. I had the photo on my digital camera from yesterday. It was a masterpiece of irony, the bright pink plastic neck curving gracefully against the backdrop of her $20,000 professional landscaping. The flamingo looked like it was smirking at me. In the HOA management software, there was a tab called Pending Board Review. If I entered the violation there, it would be timestamped. It would be official. It would show up in the monthly report that went to the treasurer and the vice president. But I also knew the vice president was Brenda's Tuesday night bridge partner, and the treasurer was a man named Greg who only had his oversized RV-compatible driveway because Brenda had bullied the committee into approving it last year. I was holding a grenade with the pin pulled, and I was standing in the middle of my own living room. If I threw it, I might take Brenda down, but the blast would almost certainly take my career and my housing with it. I looked at the save button on Brenda's violation file. Then I looked at the delete icon. The HOA office, my sanctuary, felt smaller than usual on Thursday morning. It was a windowless box filled with the smell of old toner and the rhythmic, ghostly wheeze of the filing cabinet drawers. Usually, the stacks of paper gave me a sense of order. Today, they felt like evidence. I spent the first 2 hours doing deep filing, which was really just an excuse to avoid my email inbox. But as I reached the bottom of the pending action crate, the one Brenda usually helps me organize on Monday afternoons, I found a manila folder that shouldn't have been there. It was tucked behind a stack of pool chemical receipts, unmarked and unassuming. I opened it, and my stomach did a slow, nauseating roll. Inside were carbon copies of violation notices. Not just any notices. These were the ones I had written over the last 6 months for Unit 1. The broken sprinkler head that flooded the sidewalk. The unapproved repainting of her front door to a shade of eggshell that was definitely more cream. And most recently, a formal complaint about the illegal fire pit she'd installed in her backyard. Each one had been pulled from the outgoing mail stack. On the top right corner of every sheet was a familiar scrawl in purple ink. Hold for President's review. She wasn't just ignoring the rules. She was intercepting the paper trail before it could reach the official ledger. In the eyes of the HOA's digital system, Brenda was a saint. In this folder, she was a serial offender. Find something interesting, Ben? I jumped, nearly knocking my lukewarm coffee into the shredder. Standing in the doorway was Greg, the board treasurer. Greg was a man who looked like he was made entirely of khaki and sensible decisions. He was the one Brenda had helped with his oversized RV driveway. He was currently holding a stack of invoices for the clubhouse roof, but his eyes were fixed on the manila folder in my hands. Just cleaning up some old correspondence, Greg, I said, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I closed the folder a little too quickly. Brenda mentioned we needed to clear out the 2023 backlog. Greg stepped into the room, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft, heavy thud. He didn't sit down. He just leaned against the metal desk, crossing his arms. Brenda's a force of nature, isn't she? He said. His voice was neutral, but there was a flicker of something in his expression. Pity, maybe? Or warning. She likes things to look a certain way, on the streets and in the books. She says it protects the collective peace of Silver Creek. The collective peace seems to have a lot of exceptions lately, I blurted out. It was a mistake. A manager shouldn't talk back to a board member, but the weight of the hidden folder was making me reckless. I've got residents asking why they're getting fined for brown patches in their lawns while the president's backyard looks like a construction zone for a new deck. Greg stayed silent for a long beat. He looked at the closed folder, then back at me. Ben, you're a good kid. You keep the pool clean and the grass measured. Most people here like you. But you have to remember, the board is a team. And on this team, Brenda is the quarterback. If the quarterback wants to run a specific play, the rest of us just block for her. It keeps the game moving. He tapped the invoices on the desk. Process these by Friday. And Ben, don't get lost in the old files. Some things are buried for a reason. It's better for the prestige if they stay that way. He left as quietly as he'd arrived. I looked at the manila folder. I looked at the shredder. Then I looked at the high-speed scanner sitting in the corner. If I shredded these, the evidence of Brenda's special treatment vanished forever. I'd be safe. I'd keep my stipend, my home, and my quiet little job. But I'd also be the one holding the shovel for her. I walked over to the scanner. My hand was steady, which surprised me. I fed the first page in, the violation for the fire pit. The machine whirred, a thin line of green light passing over the purple ink of Brenda's handwriting. Scan. Save. Encrypt. I wasn't just a manager anymore. I was an archivist for a disaster. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The heat hadn't let up, but the wind had picked up, swirling dead oak leaves into miniature tornadoes on the pristine driveways of Silver Creek. I was hunched over the scanner, the rhythmic thrum click of the machine providing the soundtrack to my treason, when the office door slammed open. It didn't just open. It bounced off the rubber stopper with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Brenda stood there, her tennis whites replaced by a power suit in a shade of red that practically screamed emergency. She wasn't carrying a latte today. She was clutching a stack of printed photos, and her face was pinched into a mask of righteous fury. Ben, we have a crisis, she barked, stalking toward my desk. She slapped the photos down over my scanned documents. Look at this. Look at the shame of it. I looked. It was Mr. Henderson's house. But these weren't the clinical wide-angle shots I took for the records. These were close-ups, aggressive, invasive zooms of the peeling paint on his shutters, a small patch of crabgrass near his mailbox, and a single, rusted gutter hanging at a slight angle. I went for a jog this morning, Brenda said, her voice trembling with what she clearly thought was tragic concern. I actually had to stop. I almost tripped because I was so distracted by the decay. It's a cancer, Ben. If we let Unit 58 slide, the whole street will look like a squatter's camp by Christmas. Brenda, I told you, I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the adrenaline spiking in my chest. Mr. Henderson's wife handled the maintenance. He's struggling. I'm trying to get a volunteer group from the church to— No, she snapped, her palm hitting the desk. No volunteers, no soft touches. This is a business, and he is a defaulting shareholder. I want a Stage 3 violation notice issued by noon, maximum fines, and I want a notice of intent to lien drafted. We need to make an example of him. My blood went cold. A lien meant the HOA could eventually foreclose on his house for some peeling paint and a sagging gutter. You want to take a veteran's house because of his shutters? I asked, the words out of my mouth before I could filter them. Brenda's eyes narrowed into slits. The clueless act was gone. This was pure, cold calculation. I want to protect the equity of the other 200 families who do follow the rules. And since you seem so concerned about fairness, Ben, I've decided to help you out. I'm calling a special executive session tonight. We're going to discuss the manager's discretionary powers, or rather, the lack thereof. She leaned over the desk, her shadow falling across the folder of her own hidden violations. If that Henderson notice isn't in his mailbox by the time I finish my lunch, I'll assume you're no longer capable of performing the unpleasant parts of this job. And we both know there are plenty of people who would love a free house in exchange for following orders. She turned on her heel and marched out, the scent of her perfume lingering like poison gas. I sat there, staring at the photos of Mr. Henderson's house. Then I looked at the digital folder on my screen, the one containing Brenda's illegal fire pit, her unpermitted deck, and her statement piece flamingo. The rock was Brenda's threat to fire me. The hard place was the look on Mr. Henderson's face if I handed him that letter. I stood up and grabbed my clipboard. I didn't head for the printer. I headed for my car. If I was going to be the villain in Brenda's story, I was going to do it my way. I pulled into Mr. Henderson's driveway 5 minutes later. The house was quiet, the curtains drawn. It did look tired. The paint was chalky and the garden was thirsty, but it looked like a home. Brenda's house looked like a showroom. I walked up to the porch, my heart in my throat. I wasn't there to give him a fine. I was there to tell him to hide. But as I reached the door, I saw a small, bright yellow flyer tucked into the screen. Thinking of selling? Cash for homes. Any condition. Call Brenda's Boutique Realty. My jaw dropped. Brenda wasn't just enforcing the rules. She was using the HOA fines to tank the value of the eyesores so her own real estate company could swoop in, flip them, and pocket the commission. The clueless narcissist wasn't clueless at all. She was a shark. The invitation hadn't been an ask. It was a summons. A gold-embossed card tucked into my office door that morning. Intimate board strategy supper at the president's residence, 7 p.m. Dress, smart casual. Below the print, Brenda had added a handwritten note in her signature purple ink. Bring the Henderson file. We'll sign the final notice over dessert. I spent the afternoon with a knot in my stomach that felt like a lead fishing weight. My spouse, Sarah, tried to talk me out of going. Ben, this isn't a dinner. It's an ambush. She's going to make you pull the trigger on that poor man in front of everyone, so you're just as dirty as she is. If I don't go, I'm fired by Monday, I muttered, adjusting my collar in the hallway mirror. And if I'm fired, we're packing our boxes by Tuesday. This resident manager gig only works if I have a residence. We walked the 2 blocks to Brenda's estate in a heavy, suffocating silence. Her house was the crown jewel of Silver Creek, a sprawling neo-colonial with uplighting that made the white columns glow like bone. As we stepped onto the porch, I saw it, the Pink Flamingo. It was positioned right next to the front door now, practically mocking me. Brenda opened the door before I could even ring the bell. She was wearing a silk caftan and holding a crystal glass of something amber. Benny, Sarah, you look functional, she said, her eyes raking over my off-brand chinos. Come in, come in. Greg and the vice president are already out back. We're doing a fireside chat. She led us through a house that felt less like a home and more like a high-end furniture showroom. Every surface was marble or glass. There wasn't a single stray speck of dust or a misplaced book. We stepped out onto the massive Brazilian hardwood deck, the one I knew for a fact hadn't been permitted by the county. And there it was, the fire pit. It was a custom-built stone behemoth, roaring with a flame that was definitely higher than the 4-inch limit set by the fire marshal. Greg was sitting near it, looking uncomfortably warm in a sweater vest, while the vice president, a quiet woman named Diane, who mostly just nodded at whatever Brenda said, sipped Chardonnay. Isn't it divine? Brenda sighed, gesturing to the flames. There's something so primal about fire. It really focuses the mind on what matters. Heritage, order, property values. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Brenda served a dry roast chicken while spent the entire meal cluelessly lamenting the tragedy of Mr. Henderson. It breaks my heart, truly, she said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. But as president, I have to be the guardian of the gates. If we let one house rot, the rot spreads. Ben, you brought the papers, didn't you? Let's just get the unpleasantness over with so we can enjoy the lemon tart. I felt the folder in my satchel like it was vibrating. Inside wasn't just the Henderson notice. It was the printout of Brenda's Cash for Homes flyer I'd found on his porch. I have the file, Brenda, I said, my voice steady despite the sweat trickling down my back. But before we sign, I was looking through the county records this afternoon. I couldn't find the permit for this deck or the gas line for this fire pit. I'm sure it's just a filing error, right? Like the ones in my office? The air on the deck went suddenly, violently still. Greg stopped chewing. Diane's glass paused halfway to her mouth. Brenda didn't move. She just stared at me over the rim of her glass, the firelight dancing in her pupils. The neighborly facade didn't just slip, it evaporated, leaving behind something cold and predatory. Ben, she said, her voice a low, vibrating hum. Be very, very careful. You're a guest in my home, and you're an employee of this board. Are you suggesting that the president of this association isn't in compliance? I'm suggesting that if we're going to talk about rot and equity, we should probably start with the biggest violations first, I replied. I felt Sarah's hand grip my knee under the table, a silent plea to stop. Brenda set her glass down. The clueless tilt of her head returned, but her eyes were like flint. Greg, Diane, I think Ben is tired. The heat is getting to him. Why don't we table the Henderson matter for tomorrow morning? I'll come by the office at 8 a.m. sharp. We can discuss the filing errors then. She stood up. The dinner was over. As we were ushered to the door, Brenda leaned in close to my ear. The scent of her perfume was cloying, like lilies at a funeral. You have exactly 12 hours to decide if you want to be a manager or a martyr, Benny. Choose wisely. Martyrs don't get to keep their security deposits. We walked home in the dark, the flickering streetlights of Silver Creek casting long, jagged shadows. I knew I'd just declared war, and I knew that by 8:01 a.m. tomorrow, I'd likely be unemployed. The walk back from Brenda's felt like a march to the gallows. Every porch light we passed seemed like a spotlight, and every rustle in the manicured hedges felt like a witness. Sarah didn't say a word until we were safely inside our own unit, the deadbolt clicking home with a finality that made my teeth ache. You poked the bear, Ben, she said, her voice tight. No, you didn't just poke it. You brought a blowtorch to its cave. She's trying to steal Henderson's house, Sarah. I couldn't just sit there and eat her dried chicken while she planned a foreclosure over lemon tart. I didn't sleep. I spent the night paced the living room, watching the digital clock on the microwave bleed red minutes into the dark. At 4 a.m., I gave up and went out to my car. I needed to get to the office before Brenda. I needed to make sure my digital trail was scrubbed and my physical evidence was off-site. But when I reached my silver sedan, I stopped dead. Stuck under the driver's side windshield wiper was a folded piece of bright neon yellow paper. My heart hammered. It was the same paper Brenda used for her Cash for Homes flyers. I pulled it out, expecting a legal threat or a termination notice. Instead, it was a handwritten note in crude, blocky letters, not Brenda's elegant purple cursive. We see you, lackey. Bitches lapdogs don't belong on our street. Stop finding the poor while the queen plays in her unpermitted pool. We know about the fire pit. Do your job or get out. I felt a cold wash of nausea. It wasn't just Brenda I had to worry about. The neighborhood was turning, and they thought I was on her side. To them, I wasn't the guy trying to protect Mr. Henderson. I was the guy who had spent the last 2 years measuring their grass and counting their trash cans while Brenda's estate flourished unchallenged. I looked up at the darkened windows of the surrounding units. How many people were watching me right now? How many people saw me leave Brenda's dinner party laughing, or so it seemed, while their own fine notices sat on their kitchen tables? I drove to the clubhouse in a daze. The parking lot was empty, the pool lights casting a ghostly blue glow over the silent water. I let myself into the office, the air smelling of stale carpet and ozone. I sat at my desk and looked at the official manager's log. It was a record of every interaction, every fine, and every warning I'd issued since I took the job. It was a map of my own complicity. Suddenly, the external motion light outside the office window flickered on. I froze. A shadow moved across the frosted glass of the door. Then, a soft thud as something was slid through the mail slot. I waited 60 seconds, my breath held until my lungs burned, before I crept to the door. On the floor was a plain manila envelope. No return address, no name. Just 3 words scrawled on the front. For the manager. Inside was a thumb drive and a single printed photograph. The photo was taken from a high angle, likely a drone. It showed Brenda's backyard, but not the deck. It showed a small, cleverly concealed shed at the very back of her property, hidden behind a dense line of Leyland Circus trees. The door was open. Inside, stacked floor to ceiling, were boxes labeled Silver Creek Archies, 2018 to 2022. She hadn't just been vetting my mail. She had stolen years of official records, financials, meeting minutes, and legal correspondence, and moved them to her own private property. The thumb drive contained a single video file. I plugged it into my computer, my hand shaking. It was a recording from a Ring camera. 2 months ago, midnight. Brenda was standing on Mr. Henderson's porch. She wasn't leaving a flyer. She was using a spray bottle, likely filled with salt water or a chemical defoliant, on his prize-winning rose bushes. "Create the blight," she whispered on the grainy audio, her face illuminated by the infrared light. "Then cure the blight." The clueless president wasn't just a shark. She was a saboteur. She was actively destroying the neighborhood's beauty to justify the fines that would force the sales. I looked at the clock. 7:45 a.m. Brenda would be here in 15 minutes. I had the evidence to ruin her, but the anonymous note on my car reminded me that the community already hated me. If I came forward now, would they even believe the lapdog? Or would they think I was just trying to save my own skin? The 8 a.m. sun was already baking the clubhouse parking lot when the black sedan belonging to the HOA's insurance provider, Miller and Associates, pulled into the reserved for president spot. Brenda hadn't arrived yet. She was likely still at home, polishing her vision, or perhaps misting more of Mr. Henderson's roses with herbicide. I stood at the office window, the thumb drive heavy in my pocket. The man who stepped out of the sedan was named Arthur. He was 70, wore a suit that looked like it was made of corrugated cardboard, and carried a clipboard with the weary aura of a man who had seen 1,000 flooded basements and 1,000,000 petty lawsuits. "Morning, Ben," Arthur grumbled, stepping into the air-conditioned gloom of the office. "Where's the fearless leader? I sent the notice for the triannual site inspection last month. We're doing the full liability walkthrough today." My heart did a jittery dance. "She's on her way, Arthur. I didn't realize the inspection was today." "It's in the calendar, son. If the common areas don't meet code, or if the architectural integrity has been compromised by unpermitted structures, the association's premiums double. And if the premiums double, the dues go up. And then I have to spend my afternoon listening to 200 people scream at me." At 8:10 a.m., Brenda's Lexus screeched into the lot. She didn't park. She abandoned the car at an angle that defied 3 different traffic bylaws. She marched in, her face a mask of practiced, clueless delight. "Arthur, you're early. We weren't expecting you until 10, she chirped, her eyes darting to me with a lethal sharpness. The message was clear. "Why didn't you warn me?" The email said 8, Brenda. Arthur said, already clicking his pen. "Let's start with the perimeter. I want to see the new drainage easements and the—" "Oh, the perimeter is so boring," Brenda interrupted, stepping between him and the door. "Why don't we start at the north gate? It's much more scenic. Ben, why don't you stay here and tidy up the filing? I'm sure Arthur and I can handle the walking." "Actually," Arthur said, peering over his spectacles at a map, "I'd like to see the estate lots. We've had a report of some unpermitted structural work near the creek line. Fire hazard concerns. We need to check the setbacks." Brenda's tan seemed to fade a shade toward gray. The creek line ran directly behind her backyard. It was where her massive, unpermitted deck and the stone fire pit sat, encroaching on protected wetlands. "That's just gossip, Arthur," she said, her laugh sounding like breaking glass. "You know how these people are. Jealousy is the unofficial sport of Silver Creek." "Jealousy doesn't start fires, Brenda. Uncapped gas lines do," Arthur countered. He looked at me. "Ben, grab your camera. I need official photos of every backyard on the East Ridge. starting with Unit 1. The hard place had just turned into a diamond-tipped drill. Brenda looked at me, her hand gripping her designer handbag so tight her knuckles were white. "Ben," she said, her voice a low, vibrating warning. "I'm sure you have that very important report to finish for the treasurer. The one about the filing errors we discussed? I can take the photos for Arthur, to save time." "Company policy, Brenda," Arthur snapped. "The manager takes the photos. The board doesn't touch the evidence. It's called internal controls. Move it, Ben." We walked out into the heat. I felt Brenda's eyes boring into the back of my skull as I followed Arthur toward her property. She trailed behind us, constantly, accidentally, dropping her keys or pointing out fascinating weeds in other yards to distract him. As we reached the edge of her lawn, the scale of her arrogance was on full display. The deck didn't just exist, it lunged toward the water. The fire pit was a monument to noncompliance. And there, tucked behind the cypress trees, was the shed I'd seen in the drone photo, the one filled with the community's stolen history. Arthur stopped. He looked at the deck. He looked at the fire pit. Then he looked at his clipboard. "I don't see an ARC approval for any of this, Brenda. Not the wood, not the stone, and definitely not the gas line." "It's a temporary staging area," Brenda stammered, her clueless mask finally cracking. "For the fall festival. It's all coming down in October. Right, Ben?" I looked at Arthur. Then I looked at Brenda. I could see the panic in her eyes, the genuine fear of a narcissist about to be exposed to an authority she couldn't charm. "The fall festival committee hasn't met yet, Brenda," I said quietly. I raised the camera. I didn't take a photo of the deck. I walked straight past it and pointed the lens at the shed. "Ben?" Brenda hissed, moving to block me. "What are you doing? That's my private storage." "Arthur," I said, ignoring her. "As the manager, I'm required to report any association property being held in an unsecured location. That shed contains 5 years of our financial records. I'd like you to note the lack of fireproofing for the archives." Arthur's eyebrows shot up. Stolen records? In a backyard shed next to an illegal fire pit? He began writing furiously. "That's not just a premium hike, Brenda. That's a cancellation of coverage event. The board could be personally liable for every slip and fall in this neighborhood if the insurance drops us for fraud." Brenda stood in the center of her illegal deck, the sun beating down on her. She looked small for the first time, but as Arthur walked toward the shed, she turned to me, her face contorting into a snarl. "You're dead, Ben," she whispered. "I'll have your keys by noon, and I'll make sure every management firm in the state knows you're a security risk." The air in the office was thick enough to chew. Arthur had left an hour ago, his face a thundercloud of actuarial fury, leaving behind a preliminary notice of non-compliance that sat on my desk like a live round. I was staring at the blinking cursor of my terminal when the door creaked open. It wasn't the aggressive slam of Brenda or the soft shuffle of Greg. It was a slow, hesitant sound. Mr. Henderson stood there. He looked smaller than he had 2 days ago, his shoulders hunched under a faded flannel shirt despite the 90-degree heat. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled yellow flyer and a formal envelope I hadn't even sent yet. "Ben," he rasped, his voice cracking. "I got this in the mail. A notice of intent to lien. It says I owe the association $4,000 in backdated fines for the shutters in the lawn." My heart dropped into my stomach. I hadn't sent that. I looked at the envelope. It had the Silver Creek letterhead, but the postage stamp was crooked, and the return address was a P.O. box I didn't recognize. "I don't have $4,000, Ben," he whispered, sitting heavily in the guest chair. "Since Martha passed, the prescriptions, I was going to paint them myself, I swear. I just need a little more time." I reached out and took the letter. As I smoothed it out, I saw the signature at the bottom. It wasn't mine. It was a digital scan of my signature, poorly cropped and authorized by B. Vance, president. She'd bypassed the system entirely. She was forging my name to legal documents to accelerate the foreclosure. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice trembling with a cocktail of rage and guilt. "I didn't write this. This isn't an official board action. But it's got the seal, Ben. And this." He held up the yellow flyer. "This lady, Brenda, she came by this morning. She was so kind. She said she heard about my troubles with the law. She offered to buy the house for cash. Said she'd give me enough to move into a nice assisted living place in the city. She said it was a neighborly favor to save me from the sheriff's sale. The neighborly favor was likely 60 cents on the dollar. She was trying to scare him into signing over his life's equity before the audit report hit the fan. Don't sign anything, I said, standing up so fast the chair hit the wall. Do you hear me? Not a single piece of paper. Not for her. Not for the board. Not for anyone. But she said, if I don't sign by tonight, the fine's double, he said, tears welling in his clouded eyes. I don't want to be a burden, Ben. I don't want to ruin the prestige. That word, prestige. It was the cage Brenda used to keep everyone in line. I walked around the desk and knelt beside him. Mr. Henderson, Brenda is lying to you. She's been sabotaging your house. I have proof. I have a video of her hurting your roses. He blinked, confused. My roses? Why would anyone hurt Martha's roses? Because she's a shark, I said, the people pleaser in me, finally, permanently dying. And I've been her pilot fish for too long. I walked over to the shredder, picked up the lien notice she'd forged, and fed it in. The machine groaned as it turned her thread into confetti. Go home, Mr. Henderson. Lock your doors. If Brenda comes by, don't answer. I'm going to fix this. As he shuffled out, looking more confused than relieved, I felt a strange, cold clarity. I didn't care about the stipend. I didn't care about the free rent. I looked at the thumb drive on my desk, the one with the rose sabotage and the drone shots of the stolen archives. I wasn't going to play the leverage game. Leverage was what Brenda used. I was going to use the truth. I opened the community-wide email portal, the one intended for emergency weather alerts and trash pickup delays. My hand didn't shake as I typed the subject line. Urgent. Mandatory community meeting regarding board fraud. I attached the video. I attached the photos of the hidden shed. And then I attached a scanned copy of the forged lien Brenda had sent to an 82-year-old widower. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The hard place was gone. I'd just blown up the rock. The silence that followed the click of the send button was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the heavy, ionized air right before a lightning strike. I sat in the glow of the monitor, watching the message sent confirmation bar crawl across the screen. 212 recipients. Every house in Silver Creek, from the smallest townhome to Brenda's sprawling estate, had just received a digital hand grenade. I didn't wait for the replies. I knew Brenda had a priority alert set for all community-wide emails. My phone, sitting on the desk, began to vibrate so violently it skittered across the wood. Brenda Vance, Mobile. Brenda Vance, home. Greg, treasurer, Mobile. I ignored them all. I grabbed my master key ring and my laptop. I wasn't going to sit in this closet and wait for her to cut the power or call the police with some trumped-up trespassing charge. I headed for the archive shed in Brenda's backyard. The neighborhood was eerily still as I drove my sedan toward the East Ridge. It was nearly 10 p.m. Porch lights were flickering on as people checked their phones, the blue light of screens illuminating faces behind curtains. I saw Mrs. Gable at Unit 42 standing on her lawn, staring at her phone with her mouth hanging open. I parked 2 streets away and cut through the common area woods, the humidity soaking through my shirt. I reached the edge of Brenda's property, staying low behind the line of Leyland cypress. Her house was ablaze with light. I could hear her screaming, not at me, but at someone on the phone. Likely Greg. I don't care if it's sent. Shut down the server. Pull the plug. I'll sue that little rat until he's living in a cardboard box. I ignored the shouting and moved toward the shed. The estate lots had motion sensor lights, but I knew the blind spots. I'd been the one who mapped them for the security audit last year. I reached the shed door. It was locked with a heavy-duty deadbolt. Clack, clack, clack. I didn't have a key for this. Brenda had replaced the association lock with her own. I looked at the unpermitted stone fire pit 3 feet away. A heavy, decorative iron poker was leaning against the stonework. I grabbed it, wedged the tip into the doorframe, and leaned back with everything I had. The wood groaned, a sickening splintering sound that felt like it was echoing across the whole valley. Crack. The door swung open. I scrambled inside and pulled it shut behind me, clicking on my flashlight. The drone photo hadn't done it justice. There were dozens of boxes. It wasn't just archives. I opened the top one. Silver Creek Resale Commission reports. Inside were hundreds of pages of real estate documents. Every time a house in the neighborhood sold, Brenda's boutique realty took a cut. But looking closer at the fine print, she'd been charging the association administrative transfer fees that went directly into her private LLC. She wasn't just flipping houses, she was taxing the very act of moving in or out. I opened another box. Board minutes, redacted. She had two sets of books, one for the official record and one that showed the actual votes. I found the entry from 6 months ago. The board had actually voted against finding Mr. Henderson. Brenda had simply crossed it out in purple ink and written, "Presidential overrule. Proceed with maximum penalties." I heard footsteps on the grass outside. Heavy, panicked running. "Ben, I know you're in there." Brenda's voice was no longer a polished bell. It was a jagged, hysterical screech. "That's private property. I'm calling the sheriff. You're finished. Do you hear me? You're a common thief." I didn't answer. I took my phone out and started filming, panning across the stacks of boxes, the labels, and the redacted minutes. I opened the boutique realty folder and held the pages up to the light so the camera could catch every illicit scent. "The sheriff is already on his way, Brenda," I shouted through the door, my voice surprisingly calm. "But I don't think they're coming for me. I sent the link to the state attorney's office 10 minutes ago. It's all on the cloud now. You can't delete the sky." The footsteps stopped. Silence fell over the backyard, save for the distant rising wail of a siren coming from the main gate. I sat on a box of stolen history, the iron poker still in my hand. I looked at the boutique realty files one last time. She had projected an image of prestige to hide a mountain of petty theft. The flashing blue and red lights of a sheriff's cruiser finally sliced through the gaps in the shed's wooden slats, turning the interior into a strobing disco of legal consequence. I didn't move. I sat on a box of boutique realty records and waited until I heard the heavy crunch of boots on the gravel and the authoritative bark of a deputy. "Sheriff's office! Step out of the structure with your hands visible." I pushed the splintered door open. The night air hit me, thick and smelling of ozone. Brenda was standing near her illegal fire pit, her silk caftan fluttering in the breeze. She looked like a fallen queen, her face pale under the spotlights, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Officer, that's him. That's the man who broke into my private storage. He's been harassing me for weeks. He's unstable." The deputy, a woman with a no-nonsense buzz cut and a name tag that read Harris, looked at the iron poker in my hand, then at the splintered doorframe. She didn't draw her weapon, but her hand stayed near her belt. "Drop the iron, sir. Step toward me." I dropped the poker. It hit the stone with a dull thud. "I'm Ben Morgan, the resident manager. This shed contains 5 years of stolen HOA archives. I have a court-admissible digital trail of the theft, and I'm currently standing on unpermitted construction that violates 3 county safety codes." "He's lying!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking. "It's my garden supplies! He's obsessed with me!" Deputy Harris looked at the shed, then back at Brenda. "Ma'am, we got about 15 calls in the last 20 minutes from your neighbors. Something about an email blast and a video of you poisoning roses?" The clueless mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Brenda's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Behind her, across the low stone wall that separated the estate lots from the rest of the community, I could see them. The neighbors. They weren't hiding behind curtains anymore. They were standing on the sidewalk in bathrobes and pajamas, holding their phones like torches. Mrs. Gable was there. The Millers were there. Even Greg, the treasurer, was standing at the edge of the light, looking like he'd aged 10 years in a single hour. "I want him trespassed," Brenda screamed, finding her voice again. "I'm the president of this association. I'm the one who gives the orders." "Actually, Brenda," I said, stepping fully into the light. "According to the bylaws, Article 9, Section 2, any officer charged with a felony or gross negligence of fiduciary duty is suspended pending a vote of the membership. I've already sent the suspension notice to the rest of the board. You aren't the president right now. You're just a homeowner with a lot of explaining to do." As the police cruiser pulled away, the crowd didn't disperse. They stayed. The silence was heavy, expectant. Brenda retreated toward her back door, her heels clicking sharply on the Brazilian hardwood deck. But before she reached the glass slider, she turned back. The clueless look was gone, replaced by a pure, concentrated venom I'd only caught glimpses of before. "You think you won, Benny?" she hissed, her voice carrying across the lawn. You just destroyed the value of every house on this street. You turned Silver Creek Estates into a crime scene. No one is going to buy here now. You didn't save the neighborhood. You burned it down." She slammed the door. I stood in the dark backyard, the lapdog, who had finally bitten back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sarah. "Are you okay? The whole street is outside." I looked at the neighbors. They weren't cheering. They were looking at me with a mix of shock and suspicion. I realized Brenda was partly right. I had broken the illusion of prestige. Now, I had to see if anything worth saving was left under the wreckage. "Ben?" It was Greg. He had walked across the lawn, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "The annual meeting is tomorrow night. It was supposed to be about the budget. Now, I think it's going to be a trial." "I'll be there, Greg," I said. "And I'm bringing the B books." "I know," he sighed. "I just hope there's an association left to manage when we're done." The community center smelled of lemon floor wax and industrial strength anxiety. Usually, the annual general meeting, AGM, was a sparsely attended affair where three retirees argued over the cost of pool salt. Tonight, every one of the 200 folding chairs was filled, and people were lining the back walls three deep. I stood in the small kitchenette off the main hall, checking my laptop connections. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were cold, precise, and detached. I had spent the last 14 hours building a digital guillotine. "Ben?" I looked up. Mr. Henderson was standing in the doorway. He'd put on a suit, an old charcoal gray one that hung off his thin frame, but he brushed his hair and polished his shoes. He looked like the man he used to be before Brenda started curating his life. "I'm here, Ben," he said, his voice steady. "I brought the letters, the ones she forged." "Thank you, Joe. Just sit near the front. When I give the nod, you just tell them the truth." I walked out into the hall. The room went silent. It wasn't a respectful silence. It was the hush of a crowd waiting for a car crash. Brenda was already at the head table. She was dressed in a suit of blinding, defiant white, her hands folded neatly over a leather portfolio. She looked like a saint waiting for a canonization ceremony. Greg and Diane sat on either side of her, looking like they were waiting for a firing squad. "The meeting is called to order," Brenda said, her voice amplified by the podium mic. It was the professional president voice, crisp, authoritative, and utterly delusional. "Before we begin the budget review, I'd like to address the unfortunate digital breach that occurred last night. Our resident manager, Mr. Morgan, has clearly suffered a mental break under the stress of his duties. The association will, of course, provide him with a generous severance and the mental health resources he motioned to suspend the agenda," I said. I didn't use a mic. The room was so quiet my voice carried to the back row. "Under Bylaw 12.4, the membership has called for an emergency disciplinary hearing. I have the signed petition from 60% of the residents here." I didn't wait for her to object. I hit the enter key on my laptop. The projector flared to life, hitting the oversized screen behind Brenda's head. The first image wasn't a spreadsheet. It was the grainy, infrared video of Brenda in Mr. Henderson's garden, the spray bottle in her hand, glinting in the dark. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "That's a deep fake," Brenda shouted, standing up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "He's a tech-savvy child playing games. This is harassment." I hit enter again. Up came the scans of the boutique realty commissions. Column after column of administrative fees paid by the HOA directly to Brenda's personal bank account. Then, the forged lien notice against Mr. Henderson, side by side with a real estate listing Brenda had drafted for his house 2 weeks before the fine was even issued. "The prestige of Silver Creek has a price," I told the room. "And Brenda Vance has been pocketing it. She didn't want to save this neighborhood. She wanted to harvest it." The room erupted. It wasn't a polite debate. It was a roar of betrayal. Mrs. Gable stood up, shaking her fist. The Millers were shouting at Greg, demanding to know how much he knew. Brenda was screaming back now, her face turning a mottled purple that clashed horribly with her white suit. "I built this place. You were all living in a dump until I took over. You owe me your equity. You're nothing without me." "We're homeowners, Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics. "You're just the neighbor we shouldn't have trusted." Greg stood up then. He looked at Brenda, then at the room. He walked over to the podium, gently pushed her aside, and leaned into the mic. As treasurer, I move for an immediate recall election of the president. All in favor? Every hand in the room went up. It looked like a field of corn in a gale. Brenda didn't wait for the count. She grabbed her portfolio, her eyes darting like a trapped animal, and bolted for the side exit. She didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye. She just vanished into the humid night, leaving behind the wreckage of her vision. The room stayed loud for a long time. People were crying, arguing, and, for the first time in years, actually talking to each other instead of complaining about each other. I sat down at the manager's desk in the corner. I was exhausted. I was likely out of a home soon. But for the first time since I'd taken the job, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. The morning after the great reeling was quieter than I expected. Silver Creek Estates didn't look different on the surface. The lawns were still green, the mailboxes were still mostly 42 inches high, and the sun still beat down on the asphalt with the same indifferent intensity. But the air had changed. The pressure was gone. I spent my final Saturday in the community clubhouse office, not measuring grass or drafting fines, but boxes. My own boxes. The stipend and the free residence had been part of a contract that died the moment I hit send on that email. I was okay with that. There's a specific kind of freedom that comes from being unemployed and homeless at the same time. It's the freedom of having nothing left for Brenda to threaten. Greg walked in around noon, carrying 2 cardboard trays of coffee. He looked different without the sweater vest. He was wearing a t-shirt that said "World's Okayest Dad" and looked like he'd actually slept for the first time in years. "New board met this morning," he said, sliding a latte toward me. "Diane resigned. She couldn't handle the social friction at the grocery store. We've got a temporary committee now. Mrs. Gable is the new secretary. God help us all. She's already drafted a 3-page memo on the sanctity of the common area mulch." I chuckled, a real sound that didn't feel forced. "She'll be a terror, Greg, but at least she'll be an honest terror. The board wants you to stay, Ben," he said, his voice turning serious. "Not as a resident. We know that's complicated now. But as a professional consultant, we'll pay a fair market rate. No more stipends, no more favors, just a guy who knows where the shut-off valves are and how to talk people down from a ledge." I looked at my half-packed office. "I appreciate that, Greg. Truly. But I think I need a few miles of non-governed territory between where I sleep and where I work." I'd already signed a lease on a small, slightly shaggy bungalow 3 towns over. It didn't have an HOA. It didn't even have a sidewalk. The previous owner had painted the front door a shade of electric teal that would have given Brenda a literal stroke. I loved it. "I'll take the contract," I said. "But I'm working remotely 4 days a week, and I'm not enforcing mailbox heights anymore. If someone's box is an inch off, they can deal with the postmaster. I'm sticking to the big stuff, the budget, the infrastructure, and the transparency." "Deal," Greg said, shaking my hand. "Oh, and you should probably check on Unit 58 before you head out." I drove over to Mr. Henderson's house one last time. The Cash for Homes flyer was gone. In its place was a small, hand-painted wooden sign in the garden that simply said, "Marta's Roses." Joe Henderson was out on his porch, sitting in a rocking chair that had desperately needed a coat of oil for a decade. He wasn't alone. 3 younger guys from the neighborhood, guys I'd previously only seen at the gym or washing their SUVs, were up on ladders. They were scraping the peeling paint off his shutters, their laughter echoing across the cul-de-sac. "Ben," Joe called out, waving a thin hand. "Look at this. These boys showed up at 8 sharp. Said they heard the association was under new management and wanted to help with the transition." I stood by my car watching the decay being scraped away by neighbors who actually cared about each other instead of their property values. I looked toward the end of the street. Brenda's Lexus was gone. A moving truck was backed up to her pristine white porch. I saw her for a brief second. She was arguing with the movers about the prestige of her crystal glassware, her voice faint and shrill in the distance. She was leaving a crime scene, but to the rest of us, it just felt like a fresh start. I got into my car and adjusted the rearview mirror. I saw the Silver Creek gate in the reflection as I drove through it. I didn't stop to check if the gate arm was perfectly level. I didn't care if the landscaping around the sign was weed-free. I just kept driving until I hit the main road, rolled down the windows, and let the humid, ungoverned air fill the car. Silver Creek was going to be just fine. And for the first time in 2 years, so was I. And that's Ben's story. And if you made it this far, I'd appreciate you dropping a like and maybe throw in a comment to let me know what other HOA stories you'd like to hear. Hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you all next time.